One. That one matched this one. Fuck it. Money. Money. Money.
All right, some bracket predictions for tomorrow for Selection Sunday. I'm gonna say I've been making predictions for brackets for probably 3 years now, and I cannot think of a year that's more difficult than this year. Just the amount of teams that are on the bubble, teams that it's almost as if there's so many bad, or not bad teams, but there's so many bubble mediocre teams that have good things for them and they have bad things for them, and you can make a case for any team, like of the final 6 or 7 teams. Now, let's start off with talking about mid-major versus power conference teams. Now, obviously, this is something I talk about often in my other videos, and I touch on it, and I say, if you don't win your conference tournament, you're probably not going to get in as one of those smaller schools. But every year we have these teams that I feel bad for, these Middle Tennessees, these St. Mary's. And if you compare, St. Mary's and Middle Tennessee together, I mean, other than the fact that St. Mary's has the win at Gonzaga and they have another win against a tournament team in New Mexico State, Middle Tennessee has a better strength of schedule and a better RPI than St. Mary's. So I would, if I'm sitting here and I'm on the committee and I get to make my decision, I get to make my bracket, Middle Tennessee and St. Mary's would be some of those last 4 teams in. They would definitely be those last 2 teams in, for sure. I definitely value a good mid-major over a mediocre Power 5. Now, another thing that I have to remind myself, you can't hurt your head. You can't hurt yourself over the fact of these bubble teams. These bubble teams are literally teams that are probably going to get smashed as soon as the tournament starts. So as far as am I really going to make a big deal and care, if Marquette gets in instead of Baylor, or if Arizona State gets in over Louisville? I really have let go, because all these, when you look at it, I mean, all these bubble teams have a very good opportunity to they have cases for themselves. If you talk about Marquette, they have multiple good wins: 2 against Seton Hall, 2 against Xavier, or not. 2 against Creighton, and a win against Providence. 26 strength of schedule, 57 RPI. When you talk about Louisville lacks wins. That's a reason that you can leave them off. But with my case with Louisville, there's a lot of talk about Notre Dame, and Notre Dame getting in because for most of the year they didn't have Bonzie Colson, and the committee is going to take that into consideration. Well, if the committee is going to take something like that, like emotional, and oh, boo-hoo, they didn't have Matt Farrell for 5 games. Boo-hoo, Bonzie Colson was out. We've seen what Bonzie Colson's done since he's came back. He really hadn't been that impactful. This team got slaughtered by Duke. They had a miraculous comeback against Virginia Tech, which is, a back half of the tournament team. So to me, and they had a close game against Virginia. Kyle Guy did get hurt. I don't really feel bad for Notre Dame. Notre Dame does have a pretty good record. They had 20 wins on the year. So if they made the tournament, I wouldn't be necessarily surprised. But what I'm getting at is, if we're going to feel bad for Notre Dame for the turmoil and the emotional injuries and stuff that happened to them, I feel as if we kind of have to put Louisville in the same boat. And Louisville didn't have necessarily injuries, but they lost their head coach 3 days before practice started. David Pageant only had, I think, 5 out of the 9 assistants that you could have for a good 2 weeks. So not that Louisville struggled at the first of the year per se, but I mean, they had a really good season for the stuff that was going on with them. So if you want to get emotional, you can really talk about Louisville. Now, like I said, I would like to put St. Mary's and Middle Tennessee in, but the way I'm looking at it is, if you have enough if you have enough gut, enough balls to say Middle Tennessee is not in, we're going to leave them out, then let's leave St. Mary's out too. You know, the win against Gonzaga, let's not build Gonzaga like there's something crazy. You know, they had wins against Ohio State, Creighton, and Texas, and a win at St. Mary's. That's the Ohio State win is probably their best win on the year. So Gonzaga, you know, they're basically a typical mid-major. They're not, you know, now there's this lull of Gonzaga because Gonzaga has been so good for so long. But I'm not going to help with them seeding. You know, I'm not going to help. Like, you know, they were 30-4, but I'm not going to help them out just because they've been good in the past. They are a team that makes the tournament every year, so I can't do that. So those wins to me don't even really look that good for St. Mary's, and that's the reason why I'm going to leave them out of my bracket this year. You know, as much as I want to put St. Mary's and Middle Tennessee in my bracket, I'm taking them out. I'm leaving them. They're going to be some of my first four out. And over the last week or so, I've been having my bracket, looking at my bubble teams because Joe Lunardi will have someone in his safe and they'll just bounce out, and I don't really like. I mean, I know he works for ESPN and it's all about getting views and stuff like that. So I understand what he's doing, but it's like I can't even get an idea of which bubble teams have a better shot than who, because they just go all these different places, and it's after they lose a conference tournament game, and the committee is looking at these teams on the year, what they did on the year, their entire resume. They're not going, oh well, Baylor lost to West Virginia, so that takes them out. They went from being kind of safe in to they're just completely out now. So talking about that, let's talk about some of the bubble teams. Arizona State has the awesome win against Xavier and an awesome win at Kansas. The only thing the problem is Kansas dropped games to OU, Baylor, 2 to Oklahoma State. So that win was good, but in the grand scheme of things, there's these other teams in the Big 12 that are on the bubble that did that same thing. Now the Xavier win was a very good win. One thing I want to say about Arizona, when they played Kansas and they played Arizona State, when they played Xavier and Kansas, they were very, very hot. That was the best that they had played all year, and they have just been a shell of themselves ever since. They're a team I'm leaving off. I don't like it. I don't. As much as I look at Arizona and I'm like, this is a talented team. I like Arizona. When you talk about teams like Oklahoma, who just they look like dog shit. It's literally Trae Young or nothing. But the thing is their resume. You look at their resume, they have a win against Tech, 2 against TCU, they have a win against USC, just as Arizona State does, and they have a win against Kansas, just as Arizona State does. Now, the win did come at home, and that was when Trae Young was actually, taking care of his team. But I just, I know how many views Trae Young gets, how much attention he's going to grab. So I think he's a guy that they're going to put in the tournament, and why not have him in at the first 4? Then he gets 2 games maybe. So then you talk about Louisville. I have Louisville in as my last team in. Now, if Davidson wins tomorrow against Rhode Island, then Davidson will that'll be Louisville's spot, and Louisville will be out. I don't feel bad if Louisville doesn't get in. They have, no top 50 RPI wins. Their best wins are 2 against Virginia Tech and 2 against Florida State. Two teams that are on the back half in the tournament, but they're in the back half of the tournament. So, but the thing that I like about them and things that I look at strength of schedule. I look at road record on the road. What kind of conference you're in. We're not talking, oh, you're in the Big Ten. In this Big Ten and this Pac-12 this year were absolute dog shit. I mean, as good as your records look in those conferences, and Michigan has really helped themselves out with the way they won and who they beat. So they're kind of an exemption. But the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were a cakewalk this year. They were basically like the American, and they were basically like another mid-major in a sense. Now. And that's just how I feel about the Big Ten and the Pac-12. They were absolute ass this year, so that doesn't help Arizona State. But a team like Louisville, who played in the ACC went 9-9 in the ACC. To me, I I have them in as my last team in. Now, Marquette. Marquette is a team that I have in. They're right above Louisville. 26 strength of schedule, 57 RPI. RPI is not as good. Louisville's strength of schedule is 14, RPI 39. They're 5-5 on the road. They have 2 wins against Seton Hall, like I said, 2 wins against Xavier and Providence. So I like them. My next team in is Syracuse. Now, Syracuse is kind of in the same boat as Oklahoma. They don't look talented. They don't look good, but their resume has helped them out. The 13th strength of schedule, 44 RPI, wins against Clemson, Miami, and Louisville. Now, when you're talking about Louisville and Syracuse, I would honestly like to have Louisville above Syracuse, but Syracuse went into Louisville and beat them on the road. So I have to have Syracuse above Louisville for that. I like head-to-head type victories. And same goes for like Texas. Texas has 2 wins against OU. And so I got them above them. We talk about Kansas State. Kansas State's not on the bubble. They're in, but they, at the end of the year, we're talking, which one of those teams between Texas, Baylor, and Kansas State should get in. And Kansas State has 2 wins against Texas and 2 wins against Baylor. So it's kind of hard, even though their strength of schedule is as bad as it is, like 77 or something like that. It's hard to put Kansas State below them. When we talk about UCLA had 2 wins against USC. That's a reason that USC got left off. USC literally has 2 wins against Utah, win against Middle Tennessee, and New Mexico State. The Middle Tennessee win looks even worse now because the fact that Middle Tennessee's probably not going to make the tournament. So for USC, to me, they just didn't do enough on the season. They needed to win that game against Arizona today. UCLA they have about the exact same stats, but the fact that they beat USC twice, they beat Kentucky, and they beat Arizona on the road gets them into the tournament. Texas, Texas is a team beat OU twice, West Virginia, Alabama, Butler, TCU, Texas Tech. They have some good wins on the year. I wouldn't be surprised if, they're kind of projected pretty much in, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're a team that gets, I'd say, left off, because I really don't know how they view the Big Ten or the Big 12. The Big 12, to me, the top half is pretty strong, but it like after Kansas State, it kind of drops off. Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Texas. Those 4 teams, like I don't really know how they view those teams. Now the conference does have the top RPI, and so that does help. But and then Oklahoma State. There's been a lot of talk about Oklahoma State. Their strength of schedule and RPI is dog shit compared to all these other teams. They can't really be considered, even though the 2 wins against Kansas, 2 wins against OU, a win against Texas, West Virginia, and Texas Tech. Good wins, but there's other teams that have done more, and I think one thing that kind of gets forgotten is it's your entire resume. And there's teams that have, and that's the reason that Alabama's in the tournament. They have the 3rd toughest strength of schedule. That's just climbed and climbed and climbed throughout the year. 2 wins against Auburn. I think 2 wins against, 2 wins against A&M. They have some really good wins, a win against Tennessee. Alabama is honestly, was on the bubble throughout the week, and they're honestly not really on the bubble anymore. I have to put them behind Texas, though, because they did lose to Texas at a neutral site. I really try to keep what happened in the season, the head-to-head stuff, I try to keep that into consideration. So bubble-wise, my last 4 teams in, if I'm being kind of confusing here, Oklahoma, Syracuse, Marquette, Louisville. Next 4 out, St. Mary's and Middle Tennessee are my 2 teams that I wish I could put in my bracket, but if I'm trying to predict the bracket and I'm trying to put the 68 teams that I think the committee is going to put in the bracket. Now, if this was my bracket, like I said, I'd put Middle Tennessee and I'd put St. Mary's in. St. Mary's strength of schedule is worse than Middle Tennessee's. Its RPI is worse than Middle Tennessee's. And those 2 wins that they have that people are kind of saying that that's the reason that St. Mary's will get in and Middle Tennessee won't is just not strong enough for me. And then you talk about Baylor. I liked Baylor. I thought Baylor should be in. They have 2 wins against Texas. And they have a win against Kansas, a win against Creighton, a win against Oklahoma and Texas Tech. They have a lot of those wins. They have a 25th strength of schedule, but 65 in the RPI, 2-9 on the road. Oklahoma's 2-9 on the road. Oklahoma may be a team that we're thinking's in. I think they're going to get in because of Trae Young and the Trae Young effect. But 25 strength of schedule, 48 RPI, they should be in. But it's crazy to think about these Big 12 teams that are just so close to each other and which one's going to get in and which one's going to get left out. And then, Arizona State's a compelling case, but when you look at them, their strength of schedule is 76, RPI 65. As good as that Xavier and that Kansas win looked, and I thought all year, that's going to get them in. They'll pick up some more wins throughout the year, and they just didn't do that. So for me, that's kind of the bubble teams. Now, the 4 teams that I have above those, Alabama, Kansas State, Texas, and UCLA. So those are some teams that could be last 4 in, or, maybe, these teams that I'm a little bit higher on, maybe a little bit lower than some of these other teams. So that's how I'm looking. The first 4 out, like I said, St. Mary's, Middle Tennessee, and then I have Baylor and Arizona State. Next 4 out, Southern Cal, Oklahoma State, Notre Dame, and all them motherfucking Penn State motherfuckers that just want y'all in the tournament so bad. I got y'all right there, way at the back. As just, I had to put 4 teams there, so I was like, I'll put fucking Penn State there. It's hilarious if you're on Twitter seeing, people like, how's Penn State not in the tournament? Because they're fucking they're ass turds. Their resume does not help them out. 3 wins against Ohio State is great, but who else did you beat? So then let's talk about seeding. Let's talk about the seeds now that I've kind of predicted. I've fucking changed my 2s and my 3s and my 4s for the last week, and then you get down to your 6s and your 7s and your 8s, and the 8s and the 9s I changed back and forth, which doesn't really matter, but the 6s and the 7s are ones that I change back and forth. It's very tough to kind of, and definitely this year with all these mediocre teams, and my thing is it better to play a tough schedule, or is it better to have quality wins? And if obviously if you do both, then you're up a lot higher, but a lot of these teams, it's like you either have a lot of quality wins and your strength of schedule is not that good, your RPI is not as good, or you have a really tough RPI, you have a really good RPI, you have a really good strength of schedule, but you don't really have that many quality wins, or what I consider quality wins, which is beating these other top seeds. But anyways, let's wrap this up. Virginia is the top seed. That's obviously an easy one. Villanova as the 2 seed, as the first seed, but the second 1 seed. I got Kansas as the 3. Xavier as the 4. I like Xavier a lot. And then North Carolina is my first 2. I've seen North Carolina on the 3 line some. There's no way I can do it. They have the toughest strength of schedule, I think. And then 2 wins against Duke. And they've played good throughout the year. I think they have I don't really get into the quad 1 bullshit yet, but they have the most quad 1 wins out of any team. They could definitely be flip-flop with Xavier, but I think the way Xavier played throughout the year and the amount of losses that North Carolina has will help Xavier stay on the 1 line. Now, what I want to say is North Carolina, or what I said is like record, and I want to say you got to throw records out the window when you're looking at resumes, because strength of schedule will really tell you, hey, these 2 teams had the same record, but this team's strength of schedule was way harder than this team's strength of schedule. So you can really find ways to kind of figure out how you feel about teams, and strength of schedule will definitely help that out throughout when you're going through this type of stuff. So North Carolina, then Duke. Cincinnati has just had too strong of a year, too good of a year. I mean, they don't have that many good wins. A couple of good wins here and there, but I have them on my 2 line. And then a lot of I've seen a lot of Purdue on the 2 line, but I have Tennessee on my 2 line. I've really been impressed with them. They played in one of the toughest conferences on the season, and they finished strong, and I have them as my last two. Purdue as my first three. You know, Purdue kind of struggled towards the end of the year. They got to that Big Ten championship and they lost it. You know, they got second place on the year. Very quality team. I wouldn't be surprised if they were on the 2 line. They're quality enough, but I have them as the 3. When you match up Tennessee and Purdue, Purdue has the 39th strength of schedule. Tennessee has the 22nd. Respectively, Tennessee's 8 in RPI and Purdue's 9. And I mean, 2 wins against Michigan, a win against Arizona, Louisville, and Butler for Purdue, but for Tennessee, 2 against Kentucky, a win against A&M and Florida, and then the big key here, at neutral site they beat Purdue, so I have to have them above Purdue. So I got Tennessee as my 8th overall seed, and I got Tennessee as my 8th overall seed and Purdue as my 9th. Clemson as my 10th overall seed, maybe a little bit of a surprise. I've seen them seeded lower, but they have done nothing but respond since they lost DeAndre Grantham, and they have the 12th strength of schedule, 10th in the RPI, wins against North Carolina, Ohio State, Miami, Florida, and Louisville. I like Clemson on the 3 line. Auburn, since they lost McLemore, have not been the same. I don't really see this team making a deep run in the tournament. They just haven't been the same since, but we're looking at their whole body of work. They have tons of good quality wins, strength of schedules in the top 50, and a good RPI. I got them on my 3 line as the third 3. And then Arizona, I just, you know, they have the 55th strength of schedule. They really don't have that many good wins. I think a win against Alabama, a win against Southern Cal, a couple other wins, but they really, when you look at their resume, it's really not as impressive as you thought. But when you watch this team, you can't really put them any lower than a 3 because that's gonna, like, you can't misseed them. I know a couple years ago, a Kentucky team was like an 8, and they got way misseeded. And so I think Wichita State was like a 1 seed, and they got beat because basically they had to play like a seed that was supposedly an 8, which basically played like a 4 or 5 seed. So as much as, you know, Arizona could be on that 4 line, I have Arizona on my 3 line. I mean, and when you talk about tournament, the big key with tournament is you got to have a big man, and they've got 2 big men, and Deuce Ristic and DeAndre Ayton. So they're going to be a really scary team in the tournament. They don't have their resume is not good enough to be on the 2 line, but they're definitely on that 3 line. And for 4s, I got Michigan as my first 4. I'm going to be honest, and I made a video on the 28th, I think it was, and I had Michigan as like an 8 seed. I was not high on Michigan. I was a real advocate of I'm not helping the Big Ten out seeding-wise, but I've kind of came to the conclusion that, okay, those top 4 teams in the Big Ten are really pretty good teams, and they have good resumes. When you talk about Michigan, 54th strength of schedule, 12th in the RPI, 2 wins against Michigan State, a win against Purdue, a win against Ohio State, Texas, UCLA. And so pretty good wins on the year. The 2 against Michigan State is a reason why I have them higher than Michigan State. They got 5th in the league on the year, but they beat them twice, and they won the conference tournament. I'm not as big as like, oh, they won the conference tournament, let's boost them up. But when you look at their resume compared to, you know, your Michigan State, I had to put them on my 4 line. Wichita State as a 4. This team is a really good, really talented team, a good mid-major. And I like what I've seen out of them. I think at their top 35 strength of schedule, good RPI. You know, win against Cincinnati, a couple other good wins on the year. And then I got Kentucky as my next team. Kentucky has the 5th strength of schedule. Before you go, whoa, 5th strength of schedule, wins against West Virginia, you know, Arkansas, A&M, Alabama, Louisville, Missouri. And they've been playing really good. And this is a team that they struggle at the first year because they have 5 freshmen in their lineup. And they're starting to figure things out just like they do every year. And I have them as a 4. And now we're talking about Michigan State. Now, Michigan State, you're like, wow, how are they so low? You know, people want them as a 2. People want them as a 3. And it's just when you try to compare them to these other teams, they just don't match up. A win against North Carolina and a win against Purdue at home, and the 82nd strength of schedule. Out of all these top-seeded teams, they have by far the worst strength of schedule. And there you go. If you want to sit there and say they only have four losses on the year, well, that's why, because they played a dog shit ass schedule. They played an easy ass schedule. I have them as my 16th seed at 4. The last four on my thing, and you know, a lot of people will probably disagree, but I think when Selection Sunday tomorrow comes around, you're going to notice that Michigan State is going to probably be on that 4 line when you try to compare them to these other teams. And they may have a case kind of like Arizona State or Arizona, where I can't put them that low. They're not that low. You know, they're a better team than that. And that may come into play, but I don't think so. You know, and definitely with Michigan right there, you know, Michigan definitely knocked them down a spot. So 5s, I got West Virginia. I like what West Virginia did on the year. Any lower, that would just be a missed seed. Texas Tech, you know, they had times when they were injured, and they ended up having a pretty good year as well. So I've got Texas Tech on my 5 line. I have Rhode Island on my 5 line. I really like Rhode Island. Hopefully Rhode Island wins tomorrow, and that will definitely, to me, keep them on my 5 line. And then I got Houston. You know, Houston's had a very impressive year. I've repeatedly said this, no home court. They don't have a home court. They played at a different site this year, and they still went, you know, 25 or 26-6, and they're playing in the American Conference Championship tomorrow against Cincinnati. I have them on my 5 line. They could be a 6, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they could go any lower than a 6 how their season went. Now, on my 6 line, I have Florida as the top one. Now, Florida has had a helter-skelter year. They're kind of like Arizona State. They're a 3-point shooting team. If they're not hitting threes, they look like dog shit. But when you look at their resume, they probably have some of the most quality wins on their season. And so that's the reason I have them on my 6 line. A win against Gonzaga at a neutral site. I have Gonzaga as my next team. Gonzaga on the 6 line. Their strength of schedule's plus 100, so that's the reason why I'm not really high on them, and why, you know, I think the reason they have a 30-4 record and the fact that they play in the fucking West Coast Conference is another reason for it. When you talk my next team, Ohio State, I like Ohio State. I think Ohio State's a good team. They have wins against Michigan, Purdue, and Michigan State. They have good wins on their season. They have the 32nd strength of schedule. And 20 in the RPI. So they're on my 6 line. Texas A&M, you know, I've been high on Texas A&M all year. They're on my 6 line. They have a really tough schedule, and they have a lot of good quality wins. And, you know, if you're like, well, how are they in front of Arkansas? You know, how are they in front of, you know, some teams that they finished behind? Well, when you think about it, they only finished 1 game behind them, you know, I mean, and they only have one, I think they have one more loss than a team like Arkansas, and they played a much tougher strength of schedule than Arkansas did. So that's why I have them on my 6 line. Nevada on my 7 line. Nevada could be lower. Nevada's dealing with injuries right now, and Nevada, you know, did not win the Mountain West Conference tournament. So, you know, they're a team that I wanted to have on like my 5 or 6 line, but with that loss, I had to put them down a little bit. Seton Hall is a solid 7. They look like a 7. You know, good strength of schedule, good RPI, good wins on the year. I like Seton Hall. They could be scary in the tournament if they can get it right. Arkansas on my 7 line, like I said. TCU on my 7 line. Now TCU could fall to an 8, but they're just kind of like A&M. They have, other than the fact they don't have a lot of quality wins, they have wins against like Nevada, St. Bonaventure, and then like they didn't really beat anybody in the Big 12 this year. I think they had like a win against I want to say maybe a win against Tech and maybe somebody else. They just don't really have that many good wins. I think Tech and Texas is like the only 2 top 50 RPI wins that they have. But I have them on the 7 line because they have the 6th or 7th toughest strength of schedule, and they're good in the RPI. Providence, to me, you know, helped themselves out, moved up quite a bit amount with the 2 wins against Xavier, a close game against Villanova, and they beat Villanova on the year. So that looks good for them. They have a tough strength of schedule, good RPI, and I have them on my 8 line. Missouri, I have on the 8 line. Missouri, you know, had a pretty good year. I think top 25 strength of schedule, top 50 RPI. And then Miami on my 8 line. Miami has a couple of good wins, but, you know, they could be higher because of the conference that they're in and how good they played in their conference. But the fact that they don't have Bruce Brown going into the tournament, I don't think they're going to have him. I think, I was thinking he might come back, so you might have to seed him a little higher, but I don't think he's going to be able to come back in time for the tournament. Creighton as my last 8. Creighton's had a good year, but where do they fall? They may be a 9, they may be an 8. I have them in my 8 line. Butler honestly has a better strength schedule, better RPI than Creighton, but they did finish below Creighton on the year. Those two could really be flip-flopped. There's sometimes I say, wow, I think Creighton may be better than Butler, and I don't want to put Creighton below Butler. That just doesn't feel right to me. So North Carolina State, lot of quality wins. When you look at North Carolina State, Virginia Tech, and Florida State, they all don't really have good strength of schedules and good RPIs, but they have really good wins on the year. Virginia Tech beat Clemson, Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia, one of the only teams to beat Virginia on the year. And that was a crazy game, and they probably shouldn't have won that one, but that's a game that got them on the 9 line. North Carolina State, all the wins they had, a win against Arizona, Duke, North Carolina, they had other good wins. They had wins that, when it was bubble watch time and you were asking which one of these ACC teams is going to come through and really solidify themselves as a team in the tournament. They beat Syracuse at Syracuse, and they beat Louisville one of the last weekends of the season. So they're a team that's for sure in. I like them on my 9. St. Bonaventure I have as a 9. They could be a 10. They're for sure to me in. They played really good throughout the year, and there's no way they could be below Syracuse. They beat Syracuse at Syracuse. Florida State, not a good strength of schedule. I think it's 75 or so. I think they're outside the top 50 in the RPI. They're right outside of it. So I have them on my 10 line. I think they're in. They have good quality wins. That's the difference between a lot of these teams and the ACC teams. They're actually able to get some really good quality wins that'll help them for the tournament. And that may be a reason that Louisville gets left off because, teams like Virginia Tech, North Carolina State, Florida State were able to get into a tournament when they honestly don't even look as talented as a Louisville per se. Maybe they are as talented as Louisville, but Louisville couldn't go and win those games. But what's funny is, Louisville did beat Virginia Tech twice and Florida State twice. But, Louisville's, I have them as a last 4 team in, and they're kind of on the outside looking in in some other people's eyes. Kansas State, Kansas State strength schedule is not good. I don't like their strength schedule. If they didn't have the 2 wins against Texas and the 2 wins against Baylor, I really wouldn't. I probably would have them in my first 4. But they're on the 10 line. A good team. We'll see if Bryce. What's his name? Bobby Brown. Is that Barry Brown? I don't fucking know. He got hurt against Kansas, got hit in the eye or something like that. I'm sure he'll be back. And then Dean Wade was dealing with a foot injury. That could really not help them out going into the tournament. Now, Texas has dealt with injuries throughout the year, and they're on my 10 line. We already talked about them a bit. Alabama, I have them on my 10 line. I have, Texas above Alabama because of the fact that Texas beat them. But I would not be surprised if Alabama goes up to the 9 line for the fact that they beat as many good teams as they did this year. Even though they're 19-15, like I said, you can't look at records. Records is not a good way to look at things. 11s, we're looking at UCLA. We talked about UCLA, and then my first 4 that I have Oklahoma versus Louisville, and I have Marquette versus Syracuse as those first 4 in. Or the first 4 games. And then on my 11 line is my first automatic bid of a mid-major is Loyola Chicago. They're by far the top mid-major, back of the road, bottom seed teams. Now, I'll make a preview video about, each game when the bracket actually comes out. I'm not actually doing this team's going to play this team, and I'm not really doing, I don't really like to do that because I know that sometimes seeds get kind of messed up because, they'll send, even though Kansas may be, I feel like Kansas may be better than Xavier, they may put Kansas out west because it's more geographical, it's better geographically for them to have to travel out west than it is for Xavier to have to travel out west. So there's some things that, like, they'll fuck with the seeds kind of funny sometimes, but I'm just saying how I feel about the seeds from like 1 through 68 at this point. Now my 13 through my 16s, you probably don't give a fuck about these, but my 12s is Buffalo, San Diego State. San Diego State is a hot team. I'll kind of more talk about these teams when the matchups come out, like I said, but San Diego State's really hot. New Mexico State is a 12, and then Marshall. Watch out for John Elmore. Kid had an awesome game, awesome season, but awesome game in the Conference USA Championship. You ought to go back and check what he was doing. He's a white boy too. 13s, I got Bucknell, Murray State, South Dakota State, and then North Carolina Greensboro. Watch out for them. They did beat North Carolina State early in the year, and they have a good coach. He's a real good coach. I could see him getting a top job at one of these better schools, more Power 5 schools this next year if he's ready to leave. At the 14s, I got Charleston, Montana, Wright State, and then Texas Arlington. Now, Texas Arlington is going to play Georgia State tomorrow, so that seed is not complete. It could be Georgia State, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say Texas Arlington. They were kind of my dark horse that I thought could win that conference, and they didn't play that good during the season, but they did beat Louisiana yesterday. And then Harvard and Penn play tomorrow too. That's another one that we don't know who's going to be the one, but I went ahead and put Harvard on mine. I think Harvard will win the game. Iona as a 15. I just think Iona's too good to put on the 16 line, even though they didn't play in their conference that well. They're just that coach just prepares them really well. I thought Iona would win that tournament. Now, I didn't expect, Ryder and Kansas to get knocked out by those bottom seeds, but I thought Iona was going to win that tournament. Lipscomb, beat Florida Gulf Coast. They got in. They can score some points. This Matthews kid is a scorer, and then Stephen F. Austin. They could very well be on the 16 line, but I have them on the 15. On the last of the 15. When you talk about them, they only lost like 6 games on the year. They play in a dog shit ass conference, so that's not a surprise. But they beat LSU by a point early in the year. I remember watching that game, and they almost beat Missouri. So this is a team not to take lightly, the Stephen F. Austin team. Now, Cal State Fullerton, they got in the Big West. The Big West is a good competitive conference. I have them as a 16, Radford as a 16, and then my the first 4 of the 16s I have, I think it's Long Island, Brooklyn, and then I have Maryland, Baltimore County as my 16 playing against each other, and then Texas Southern versus North Carolina Central is my other 16 seed that I have playing. But I'm excited to see how the tournament turns out, how the bracket comes out. My main goal when I do this is I just want to get the seeds on the right lines, and I want to not be 2 seeds off. I want to just be 1 seed off if I am.
Oh yeah. At the top, it's just us, niggas, but I don't really trust niggas. OTF, it's just us, niggas, but I don't really trust niggas.